Welcome to the Own Up Podcast with your host, Jennifer Long.
Hi, this is Jennifer Long, and I am here with my co-conspirators, co-coaches in the Own Up program, who I have invited into this podcast to have a brief chat and talk a little bit about what the coaching part of the Own Up experience is like. And as coaches who've been doing this with me for a very long time, the kind of stuff that that comes across that we experience and what that's like, so that you, if you're thinking about getting some coaching, if you're thinking about getting in the program, what's going to happen? What is that coaching accountability really like? Yikes. So let me introduce to you. I'll start with Rich Rodriguez, who is one of my longest term coaches, who's been working with me. Golly, Rich, how long has it been? Since 20...
I want to say 05.
05, somewhere around there, right? It's been a really
Yeah.
long time. And Rich is been a performance coach with Management Possible since 2005, does a number of things, not just the Own Up, but that's what we're going to talk about today. And then I'm also going to introduce Peter Litton, who's also a coach for Management Possible. Hi, Pete.
Well, hello, Jen.
How are you?
I am doing well, thanks. I'm really excited to participate in this, and I think that everyone listening should be able to get something useful out of our conversation.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. So I'm just going to kind of act like the interviewer and kind of talk to you guys about when you think about the Own Up experience for folks, and as they come out of either reading that book or coming through the learning itself and they engage with you, what's that first conversation like? What happens? And Pete, maybe we'll start with you.
That first conversation really centers on you and where your pain points are. What's your experience? What's your frustration? Where are you having difficulty getting traction with your people, your business?
Right. Good. Anything to add there, Rich? Do you do anything different?
Again, I would agree with Pete. I think the first thing is really about the person and what they're experiencing. I usually go, if they've been in a classroom and they've experienced a classroom session with you, I will go to the point of asking, so when you sat in the class and you were listening to all of this, were there things that really struck you as interesting and you needed to know more? Second part of that would be, what kinds of problems are you experiencing today? Where are your biggest pain points? So in that one, I go along with what Pete has to say. But it has to start with them. What is bothering them? What's not going right?
Right. What's the struggle? What do you want to focus on? And so with that, I think that's probably something everybody else is kind of curious about is, oh God, what do people tell you? What kind of stuff are they bringing in the door?
Pete, you want to tackle this one first?
Sure. Typically, it's about clarity in communications. And embedded within that is, what have you clarified in terms of your expectations from the people who are working with you? What have you done to make sure that everybody is aligned with where you want to go, what you're trying to achieve? And absent that, that's a very fertile ground for starting the conversation.
For me, one of the things that happens is very often when I ask the question, people will not know what the problem is. They'll know what the symptoms are. They're not getting along with this person. They're not meeting their goals. They're having problems with their boss. But when I ask them questions, everything about them seems to be okay. So they're not quite clear on where the problem is. And I usually go at this from, what's the symptomology?
Yeah.
What are you seeing? How
Yeah.
are you experiencing it? And then once we delve into that, we begin to find um, 80% of the problems are in communications. It's what you're communicating, how you're communicating, if you're communicating, and are you getting the message across? Are you testing the waters with the boss or the other folks? And once we do that, we suddenly find that communication surfaces more than 80% of the time is the biggest issue.
Right. I think that's a big aha for people that I don't think, in my experience with it, is that it's always an eye opener once you get into the coaching, that when they're in the learning part, they're pretty confident that they're saying things and doing things and they're clear about expectations and these people should know their jobs, right? And then when they get into the coaching, we really start to parse out what the pain is, that they understand how much assumption making there is, right? Where people who've been there for a really long time are, oh, they know this, and it's, do they? Have you had the conversation? Is it clear, right? I see Rich nodding his head furiously.
Absolutely, assumptions are the biggest ones. Even when we bring people in from another organization where they may have had the same job title, and you now brought them into a new company, what they don't know is how the company operates. What are the norms of the company? What do they determine? What's the new processes that you think you know, but you're in a different company now and they do things differently and there's a different culture. And all of a sudden, people sit back and say, wait a minute, I hadn't thought of any of those things. I've just been doing what I'm doing, but I'm not getting along with the boss. It may turn out that you're operating based on your old principles from another company, and that doesn't fit in this company.
Mm,
And there's an aha moment that pops up and says, never saw that one before. Now I know I need to go talk to the boss and get into his vision and alignment or her vision and alignment to understand what they're really looking for here.
good.
And
And
that opens the door.
and to Rich's point, a lot of the time those aha moments come as a realization that, oh, I've just been on autopilot. I've gotten so good at my previous job, everything that applied there applies here. I don't really need to think about it. And the
Right.
aha is, uh-oh, I need to bring this back to where I'm paying attention.
Right. Paying attention, coming back into, I think that's and that speaks to the experience and the learning. Is it doesn't really matter at what stage in your management career you are. While this is absolutely fantastic learning and development for a first time manager, there are always managers in the room who've been doing it 15, 20 years who just go, oh my God, if I'd have known this, I could have saved myself a lot of pain and suffering, which always makes me feel good. But it's one of those, oh, I've been thinking about this in a whole different way. And so I want to kind of go a little bit deeper into some of the parsing that comes out in terms of the pain and the suffering, right? So sometimes when we're dealing with um, the symptoms, what are we really finding other than the communication itself? What are the kinds of things that present symptomatically as we're talking to folks? What do you guys generally get?
Um, the first thing is productivity may be off, and the manager is wondering why we're repeating so many things, why our expenses seem to be climbing, why are we not meeting deadlines? Why is the paperwork not getting in on time? Why am I being surprised that things are happening and I feel like I'm caught short? And my boss is now asking me questions about something I know nothing about, and I am duly embarrassed by it. And all of a sudden, all of these things beg the question, Oh, when should I have known this? How should I have known this? Why should I have known this? And it represents itself in so many different ways in the conversation. But one of the things is clear: something is wrong in the manager's world.
Right. How do I deal with this? Where's my first point of action? Yeah,
And
good.
and tying in with that, usually under those circumstances, I'm seeing things where the managers are noticing, I've got a pretty high churn rate. Oh, but it's the same as everybody else's. And starting to ask the question of what's causing that? Well, I don't know. Well, what do you think? And starting to peel the onion back on the realization that when people leave companies, it's not because of the job, it's because of the manager. And that tends to be a really big aha for them as well.
Fact, right? And in this moment, and I'm not going to call it the great resignation. I was just reading an article about let's talk. It's way more than just quitting. It's really about the great rethink. The great rethink is really more about how is this going for me? Am I getting the kind of development that I should be getting? Right. And so when you think about the pressure that managers are under, not only to just manage performance, hold people accountable, deliver results, but now they also have to help in the development sphere of what are you doing to bring people up. And when we think about the Own Up program and how the coaching is really structured, it has to do with not only are we going to work with you on identifying your issues, putting names on those issues, we're also going to help you have the conversation to own your issue, but then get the person to own the result and own their choices and own their solutions, right? Accountability isn't just I messed up. It's I've messed up and I must do better. And here's what I'm going to do better. And so it's that whole arc of the conversation. And so I'll get off that soapbox and go back to the information around the issues themselves. And so I had some notes around things that come in on over controlling. I think there's a lot of conversation around delegation, clear lines, clear expect, letting go of things that you need to let go of, right? So part of the reason performance is suffering and accountability is a problem is because we're not really clear about what we want to give up and to who. Then I've had a couple of people deal with the environment where you've got multiple layers of managers. So I'm dealing with a manager who is managing managers, and they've got managers who are either over controlling or create a psychologically unsafe environment. And what that does for people in terms of performance and taking ownership for things, especially in an environment where they don't feel safe to question or push back or have open conversations, right? So I kind of want to throw the curveball in too, as we've talked about the great rethink. Has the pandemic and the remote work changed anything relative to the type of issues that present that we're coaching relative to this?
I think that the pandemic has really heightened senses of isolation, and it's been a struggle for managers and more senior people to maintain a sense of team, to maintain a sense of connectivity with everybody, because they're thinking about how they've always done it in the past. And as a result of that, they're carrying a lot of stress, and they're not really opening their minds to having different conversations when they do get someone on Zoom or Teams or whatever their communication thing is. And so a lot of the social bonding has been left behind. The idea that I'm on this meeting with Zoom or whatever, I've got 32 minutes and it's all business. And so the personal touch gets lost. And as a result of that, the stress level goes up. It's like, I don't know that I can trust this guy. I don't know them that well. Begs the question of, okay, have you ever just had a call to say, hey, Joe, how's it going? Talk to me about your family. The kind of things that you would do around a water cooler or the cafe or just wandering around and seeing people face to face.
Right. It's definitely asking more of managers to hold the emotional space
Exactly.
for teams and whatnot. And this we had an interesting conversation with a group the other day about burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was interesting when we really got into burnout and holding that space. And the question came up about how, who I always term it as who mother's mother, right? If you're not taking care of yourself, how can you take care of your team? So, as a manager, right, what is your level of accountability there? And it very much translates into when I think when managers feel overwhelmed around having to hold all this stuff, it's not all on the manager, right? There's a level of personal accountability of if this is getting difficult, let's have the conversation, but what do you want to do about addressing what's difficult for you? Right?
Mm-hmm.
It in burnout can lead into a lot of what we call victim mentality, where people just feel things they've got no control, that this is endless, this sort of spiraling kind of thought pattern. And that's as much an issue of accountability in some ways as anything else, because people need to understand that they have control over how they're choosing to engage with the organizations, and do they need to have conversations about things that are not working, where they're struggling. And I think those are becoming a little bit more relevant in the conversations that we're having with folks as this hybrid thing continues on, and people who thought maybe I'm going to go back to work, and then the company's like, no, we're saving a lot of money on overhead on office space, and so now they're keeping you at home, and so that's a little bit of a disappointment. So what is the expectation there? And so
And
these are all things that come up. Yeah.
and tying into that, just by way of example, recent conversation I've had over the last few weeks with a fairly senior manager, because they felt the stress of the separation and the disconnect with their people, they were taking more and more and more on their plate to quote unquote shelter their people and give them a break. But as a result, this person was putting in 70, 80 hours a week, and it was showing up against the family, and concurrently was complaining about the fact that her people were not meeting the standard that she expected of them, and that she wanted a higher performance standard as she was holding for herself, which then led to the question of, well, in taking and sheltering all of your people, are you not in fact lowering your performance expectation of them? And that was a big aha moment, which resulted in doing things that made her realize, no, the team really did want to ante up, step up, and take things off her plate.
Right. Good. Yeah. Rich, were you going to say something? I see you nodding your head.
Oh my gosh, yes. Um, Particularly in the new environment where we have so many people working remotely. Some of the issues that crop up in the coaching sessions turn out to be that everybody is now in a remote location. But I had some folks that are gregarious by nature. They live alone. Their outlet was going to work and being with other people, and they got their socialization. They're now at home by themselves all of the time. Then I have the flip of that, the person who's the introvert, who didn't like working with people in the office environment loves working at home. And what I may have is a swap of productivity. I see introverts who are dealing with the tough issues of being around people all the time. Their productivity may have been lower. The gregarious folks, the extroverts, they were over the wall. Now you're pushing them into the exact opposite rotation. And I now have the extroverts whose productivity changes because they're working remotely. And the introverts, their productivity is going up. And the manager is saying, everything seems topsy turvy here. How do I deal with Joe, who was my number one performer, is now my number three? And something is going on, and I don't know how to reconcile that. And Pete mentioned just talking with people. How do we operate in this new world? How do we maintain that trust level we had in the office environment? Because trust is absolutely required in a work environment of a team.
Right.
And if you're beginning to lose it because of the remoteness, how do you regain it? And so those become issues that managers haven't had to think about in the past because everybody was all together and they were trying to build that. There was proximity. We no longer
Yeah.
have the proximity.
Proximity is one of those things too, as the upcoming hybrid environment becomes the norm, that people who are choosing more on-site time than off-site time, and what that means relative to being seen, promoted, tapped because they're there, versus those who are choosing to be more remote most of the time. And what are they, have they become invisible because of proximity, and managing the expectations around that, and managing the choices that people are making, and trying to make it very, very clear cut of there are pros and cons of either choice depending on, so it's been interesting coaching some managers through, how do I set expectations on this? And I'm like, you have to make you have to make clear not only what the expectations are, but what the unintended consequences of the choices might result in as part of that. Because I do feel, if people aren't clear at the outset of what the implications might be, you may not get tapped just because you're not in the office that day. Somebody may come in the door and say, I need some folks, and this is a thing we're working on. I'll take you because you're here. Right? Can't help that.
I think the other consequence becomes that kind of idea of you're out of sight, you're out of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And if the only thing that your boss is seeing of you is your reports, etc., there's a qualitative aspect of you that the boss is no longer seeing, other than the statistics that your reports are in on time. But your ability to relate to a whole lot of other people and do what you do is suddenly not seen by that person anymore. And when you think about people who are getting promoted, one of the most viable things to look for is how well do they communicate? And I've lost that communication. I've lost that eyesight, if you will. So that becomes an interesting thing that you have to go work with as well.
And we're seeing this not just at the manager level, but at the senior leadership team level as well. It's not like there's one level within a company that's immune from all of this. There isn't. Humans are humans, and it applies across the board.
Right. And all of this, and this all relates because it's about expectations and performance, and ultimately how people show up there, and how we want to drive that accountability on how you make your choices, right? You got to own your choice no matter where you're making it, in what capacity. So being mindful of time, and letting people get a little bit more understanding from you guys as coaches. When you think about the 6 ownership steps, right? The first one being, what's your issue? The second one being analyzing the choice point. The third one being explore the impacts. The fourth one, prepare and rehearse. The fifth one, engage the conversation. And the sixth one, build solutions. Of those 6 steps, guys, where do people struggle the most based on your experience? I know what my answer is. And I'm going to go with step number 1.
I was going to say
absolutely, it's step number 1.
It's parsing out what the real issue is. And typically, when we start that conversation, they say the issue is A. And then we'll question A, what does that mean? And they'll go, oh, well, that really is B. Okay, so talk to me about B. By the time they go through this, we've gone through most of the letters of the alphabet to find the actual real issue.
Right. It's that I want to call it this. It's this thing. And so we had a course 2 days ago where we were practicing on the issue, and the manager said it's about this email and this tone in this email, and went into talk about what the whole history of what was going on with these people, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when in asking, is it really about the email? It sounds more like this reflects poorly on the team, how this email was why it was sent out in the tone it had. And it wasn't so much the email itself as it was the fact that it was representative of a higher standard of relationship that the team was expecting. And so instead of spending an entire conversation trying to hold somebody accountable about an email, which in the context of that conversation would have been nothing but a rehashing of the events that precipitated the email to defend why it got sent, versus, hey, I've got a standard here around, my expectation is that we show up better than that. And I'm concerned because this email doesn't really represent that standard, right? Totally different conversations.
And the reality is, I think most managers start at step 5.
100%.
They just start. It's whatever made their head explode, and they start with the judgmental conversation before reflecting on what the issue actually is.
Right. They want to charge in the door with, holy cow, this is effed up. And, hey, this is really what you need to do. And so they're coming in with judgment, clarity around what they think's going on, and the answer to that. Now, that doesn't mean that managers shouldn't solve problems. Of course they should. But when you try to hold people accountable, coming in with what it is, what they should have done, and now what they need to do better, where does ownership sit when you start there? So, yeah. Step 1. The second in line for that is, I think, step 2, which is people don't bother to really think it through. That whole analyzing skill set of how are you going to approach this? What's really happening? Where's the deficit? That's another whole piece of the puzzle that I think is an aha moment in the coaching when you go through people's issues and say, well, where is that? And then how that frames up and creates confidence around what the next steps are.
And then the rehearsal piece, generally just going through the iterative process of, okay, you got step 1, you got step 2. Once managers feel like, oh, I know what the issue is, they then want to jump into the conversation without rehearsing, without thinking through, what do I actually want to say so that I'm not giving them the answer that I want to hear?
Right. And how valuable is the rehearsal, guys? How much time do we spend in rehearsal with folks?
I would say yeah, absolutely. It's a lot.
Because it's like, okay, tell me how that conversation's going to go. And they'll say, oh, it's going to go like this. And so, okay, let's try that again.
Right. And as soon as they open their mouth, they're like, oh, wait, that wasn't what I meant to say.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Right. And so that to me is the beauty of the coaching experience, is the non-biased third party, right? The only stake we have in the game is you, the learner, on getting it right. And so it's really, for those who've gone through it, and there are plenty of those managers we've worked with who get excited, right? They start trepidatious, like, holy cow, my God, this is gonna be so hard. And then they do it, and then they come back how excited to tell you what happened.
That's when they call you up and it's not even their coaching session and say, I got to tell you, I just tried it. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it. This crap actually works.
And I had, along those lines, one guy try it, and it worked so well in the work environment. He had 2 teenage daughters, and he used it at home. And he called me up and said, I asked you whether this applies at home or at work, and you said everywhere. So I tried it at home, and my 2 girls were in this dispute, and my wife was there also. I sent them apart, took them one at a time, went through exactly the same process. The girls went away. They came back 5 minutes later in tears, gave each other a big hug, and were apologizing profusely. They went away best friends, and my wife looked at me and said, "How did you do that?"
Yeah, extra added bonus. It works on everybody. It works on everybody all the time, everywhere. So skills for life. All right. With that, I'm gonna call it quits. We're at 30 minutes, so I want to make sure that we're not spending too much time, but giving people a good idea of what to expect. I appreciate you guys sharing your stories, and I'll have you back again. We'll do another one of these, and we'll talk about another part of the whole process and dive in there. That's it for now. Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Rich.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Ken.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Own Up podcast. To get more information about Own Up, go to own-up.com. That's own-up.com. To get more information about Jennifer, please go to her website at jennifertlong.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe in your favorite podcast player. Thanks for listening.